out that that's eventually going to happen. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, we roll it back to 10%, but we still have our operating budget that we need to meet. So then you'd have to raise your taxes all the way back up. So we have to plan for that carefully when that money comes in. How much we can use to reduce the tax burden and how much gets put away to use as surplus towards future year budgets so that you can maintain a steady, tax rate.
What impacts your state, your taxes so incredibly great, and it's just, so let's say you had $8 million that tomorrow came in, everything hit tomorrow. According to my numbers, it would probably help the average household somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500 a year. If tomorrow that $8 million came and everything else stayed the same. The state aid that we get from the school system is currently at $2 million. Even if you take a look at the most conservative proposal that's on the table, we would get $6 or $8 million of aid from the state. $2 million, which despite this great success of this, that would actually equal, just the amount of state aid in the most conservative program that is out there would equal all of this money going in. So $57 million is the school budget. I'm not blaming them. I'm just, that has nothing, a lot of that's out of their control as well. But that impacts your property taxes way more than anything that we ever do.
I agree. The last point, Jeanette, you said, okay, if we do this year, we have to be pretty conservative in the next few years. But there's a chance we may need a firehouse. I know there's a lot of the population that wants a firehouse. What does a firehouse cost? 3, 4 million, 5 million? What if we find out next year we need a firehouse and maybe we need it soon? So then, all of a sudden, what you just said tonight may not be applicable. We need another $5 million in 19 or 20.
It's a recommendation. Everything's a plan, and certainly we would crunch the numbers and say, okay, that's what next year's going to be, and and we'll plan accordingly. Emergencies happen all the time. I mean, that's.
But I don't know if that's
the
an
nature of the
emergency. I
budget.
think there's a potential that could happen. So I just think we need to be cognizant of that.
Well, I don't. Okay, maybe I misspoke. But those types of things, it does happen. So
When you said we have to be really kind of tight.
it's a recommendation that we try to keep our.
She's a CFO. She always wants us to be
always,
tight.
I know.
always, because if I didn't, then
I just think you all need to keep that in mind. If we do the 6, 7, 8, whatever the numbers this year, we may have to do more, a lot
And if
more.
we need it, you'll get it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else care to comment tonight? Sir, Tom.
Hi. Pardon me. Hi, I'm Tom Wood, 20 Heather Hill Way, Holmdel. First of all, this is a very informative process. I appreciate the chance to look at the numbers, and I appreciate the fact that you all spent a lot of time looking at the numbers and trying to do the right thing for the town. But what I'm hearing from the CFO is that it would be prudent to keep our debt service constant. It would be prudent to keep our borrowing constant. But it doesn't appear that the budget does that. So, and everything I'm hearing around the table in terms of changes is, well, maybe we ought to up the capital budget just a little bit for this, out of the other thing. So I heard the CFO say that we are having about $3 million of principal coming off the capital, coming off of our amount that we owe, and yet we're proposing nearly $7 million of additional bonding. So we're going up rather than down. I'm seeing that in 2017, we planned, if I've got this right, $2.4 million of debt service. In 2018, it's 2.7, it's a 13% increase in debt service. So the budget isn't matching what your own CFO is telling you should do. Furthermore, I'm hearing, oh, we're going to spend a ton of money this year, and then next year and the next year, the year after that, we're going to be really prudent. Should really the residents of the town expect you, if you're going to spend all of a sudden $7 million in anticipation of probably or almost certainly getting a whole bunch of money more in the future? I don't think that sounds like a prudent path forward. I think a prudent path forward, at a minimum, would be to constrain your capital budget so that you meet the targets of the CFO. And my last comment is that, as Eric points out, you are only a portion of the taxes that we pay. The pilot money, in my perspective, is money which is going to the township and not going to the largest expenders in the system, namely the schools. So we, the residents, are looking for you not to keep the budget constant as a result of getting all this extra money that's going to you and not the school, but to see the municipal tax drop significantly to offset the rise in the school taxes, which are inevitably going to come because they're not getting a nickel from 101 Crawford's Road. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak? Joe?
Joe Crowley, 15 Ely Road. I'm all for lower taxes as well, but we have had years of austerity. We have had, as I've been up here before saying, we have recreational needs for our children. I've heard people say all the citizens want lower taxes. I personally want to strike a balance, okay? I think a flat budget is extremely reasonable, and I want to see investment in our recreational facilities. I see an item here of $2.9 million roughly for recreational or parks improvements, and then I believe it's, I forget what it is for the next 6 years, after that another $100,000 a year or something. My question is that enough to do a turf field, a multifunction turf field for our children and our high school athletes? And is that enough to do a turf infield for baseball and softball? And are those items in your plan? So what's in the plan for that $2.9 million? And I would urge you to keep that. I think it's a reasonable thing for us, a reasonable way for us to invest in our town and invest in the youth of our town. So can you guys tell me more about what's going to be in there, or when we're going to know what's going to be in there? What's your commitment to doing those kinds of things?
So for the last several months, maybe close to a year, we've been listening to the public talk about making an investment in recreation. And what I've asked our CFO and our administrator to do during this budget process that I've been really intimately involved with since the beginning of the year is to figure out how much we may be able to spend or budget and bond for recreation without raising taxes. So the $2.9 million is pretty much what she was comfortable, the ladies here were comfortable with, kind of to back into that. So if you're asking me, have any projects been identified? No, because we haven't discussed that yet. This is a set aside for recreation, if we choose to do that. It could be a multi-purpose field. We've talked about that for months now. We're talking about, due to the recreation needs assessment, maybe a recreation center. So it has to be something that we're going to discuss over the next coming weeks and months. Nothing is set in stone to that effect.
Okay, as we move forward then, just to put this out here, turf infield for a baseball field is about $300,000. Less than that for a softball field, which is smaller. A multifunction field, maybe $1 million, $1.5 million. Okay, there ought to be, by that, ample money in there for those kinds of things. So I'd urge you to keep considering those. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone else from the public care to speak? Kathy?
Kathy Weber, 4 Duncan Drive, Holmdel. So I have a question about the swim pool utility portion of the budget. My never-ending questions about the swim club. It says here that and I don't understand this, so help me out.
I'll do my best.
Because it's not just a regular budget, it's a utility budget, correct?
Correct.
So it's showing $113,000 in realized cash in operating surplus. But then when I look at total revenues of 494,000, and then I look at total appropriations of 478,000, I see only a reserve of 12,000.
Right.
Can you explain to me what we really have
Okay.
in reserve, and is some of that going back to swim club improvements or not?
So this budget is, the way that it's created is all, it supports itself, right?
Right.
So when you're looking at it, we take so much from the surplus that is generated from the prior year.
Right.
And that's where we get at this point, I don't know if you're on sheet A34.
I am.
Okay, it says
That's what my glasses
operating,
are. Yeah.
operating surplus, it
Yep.
says 105,000.
Okay.
So that's basically what our surplus, we've been using all of our surplus every year to, manage this budget. And then we, regenerate surplus at the
Right.
end of the year for
Right.
next year's budget.
So is the surplus being used to manage the operating costs or to make capital improvements?
It's used for the whole budget, yeah.
Both?
Yes,
Okay.
all the improvements that are done, that's what pays for it.
So my concern here to the township committee is that, as you know, I've stated before, when the swim club was generating significant revenue, over the course of multiple years, there was approximately $600,000, probably more than that, but that's what I could verify, that was taken out of the swim club utility to lower the tax rate for the general tax fund. Consequently, as was noted in the recreation needs assessment, the swim club is in dire need of capital repairs. So I am going to ask you to consider that and see what we can do to maintain one of the nicest recreational facilities we have in this town and be cognizant of that. Got it?
Thank you, Ken. We got it. Jenny?
Jenny Blumenthal, 41 Stony Brook Road. I believe there's an elephant sitting on some table in this town that hasn't been mentioned in the budget because nobody has any idea of the parameters of this elephant, otherwise known as the cost of the town of affordable housing. That is going to land big plop in our laps in due course once somebody who refuses to make themselves visible to us tells us what Holmdel is going to be responsible for in the shape of affordable housing. Michael, is there any change in any kind of ruling from these amorphous mobs in Trenton?
I'm looking at in terms of the affordable housing trust or whatever, but you're asking about in Trenton?
Well, wherever this amorphous body is that is sometimes going to come out of the sky and tell us something.
The amorphous body's now Superior Court, and we have the court case pending, and as I've always said, we don't have the ability to comment on it because it's ongoing litigation. You can certainly follow the headlines when other towns are being adjudicated in court and kind of read the tea leaves on how COA is being handled now that the courts are handling it rather than COA itself. But in terms of providing money feedback specific to Holmdel, I'm really
Because
not able to.
sometime there is going to be a big tax, not a man standing there with his hand open that says, you guys gotta do something about this affordable housing and it's gonna cost somebody a whole pile of money. And I believe through state regulations, the town is not allowed to create a rainy day fund to suddenly cover us if all of a sudden we say.
Yeah,
We have a
I don't
code.
quite
What is
follow
it?
it.
What?
Well, I'm concerned that all of a sudden, we're going to be told that we have to buy, create, invent 500 houses for people with certain categories, and we're going to have to put them someplace, and it's going to hit all of these people in a big way, and we have no way of knowing what it is in advance.
It's been that way for years, though.
Yeah, so in the event the town needs to make a contribution, which I think is what you're saying?
I don't know what I'm saying.
Okay.
This is a lot of money involved here.
So a developer might come in and develop the COA housing. The township doesn't pay for that housing. There are instances when a developer will take money from our COA fund, $200,000. So to supplement the affordable housing. That comes out of the COA trust fund, it has no impact on the municipal budget.
That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay,
no,
so,
that's totally
it's totally not part of this.
But somehow it's gonna come in under the door that somebody's gonna look for money.
Right, but it's not.
But
it's not real money.
the money comes out of our COA trust fund, and that.
Which is peanuts in comparison to what they're talking about.
No, you're not, it's good.
Might we not need to buy down some of it though? You know, buy down some of that housing?
I'm glad it's good, but it doesn't feel very good.
Scott?
Scott Goldstein, 24 East Long Drive, Holmdel. Thank you for holding this. This is very informative. To follow up on Jenny's question, the math is really simple. 500 homes to Holmdel with affordable housing. Our schooling costs run about $20,000 per student. That's $10 million. Okay, the affordable housing won't cover that additional cost. That'll come back to the residents in town. So what Jenny's asking about the elephant, it's a $10 million elephant. How are we going to pay for it? Or what are you planning?
Can't tell you yet, I wish you could.
Well,
Scott,
it's-
that's the only thing I will tell you is that when one student moves in, we don't suddenly go up $20,000. You can't do the math that way. So, you know, if a family of 3 moves in, the cost didn't go up $60,000. There are fixed costs, whether we have 3,000 or 3,600 students. We are 650 students lighter than we were 12 years ago. So none of us want to see 500 homes built, and COA is a separate animal that has its own challenges. But regardless, I don't think any of us want to see 300, 400, 500 homes built, and there's no guarantee that all of those homes would not be adult homes or single bedrooms. So, you know, we can't suddenly equate what that exact student impact or increase is going to be in the community and then what that means. Right, whether maybe your classroom size goes from 18 to 20, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a $10 million increase.
So I appreciate your argument, but I'm fiscally conservative. Okay, your points. There is only a certain amount of growth that the school can sustain, and depending upon what the needs of those students are, it may actually hit earlier than later because you have special needs. Those numbers are actually lower. Okay, so all I'm just saying is, you know, let's look down the road and plan for this. I've asked at numerous meetings about updates here about coming up with creative ways to deal with COA. We've never had that type of workshop or dialogue so we can put our collective mental power together to come up with alternatives to lessen this impact on our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Raising campus, 2 Country Square Lane. I have just a few points, and I don't really mean that to be critical. Dr. Pascucci had brought up about taking 10% off the budget. You know, let's cut it. And that's good, but I get worried when I hear people say, take 10% off the budget. Let's not spend what we don't need. Maybe that's 20%. And I'm not picking on the police department, but you mentioned silencers. If nobody's complaining about the sound of a gun going off, why do we need to tell the police department, go ahead and spend money on a silencer? And I'm just using that as an example. There might be other departments where it's the same thing. Even though they can reduce their budget by 10%, don't spend money on the silencers if you don't need it, okay? Because it's real money. It's the taxpayers' money. But I do appreciate Dr. Pascucci saying to do that, because I think you could always look at a budget. I was in the business world, and I knew when they handed me, put in your budget, you fluffed it because you knew somebody was going to come after you to reduce it. So I know what goes on with it. Now, the other thing is, we keep talking about this pilot money and anticipation, but to use a silly old expression, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And when those people move in, not only will the revenue come in, but the demand on services will. And you pointed out very clearly, Mr. Hines, that if we have to hire another policeman, because now we have more residents in town and more traffic. We've got a real cost to this town that's gonna eat away at that. And maybe I don't understand the pilot money completely, but if I understand, the pilot money goes to the town and not to the schools. We just passed a $43 million referendum, which is going to make our taxes go up. And I'm all for it, investing in the schools, so I'm not criticizing that. But perhaps if those people were paying what they should have, and not the pilot, that money would be going to the schools, and maybe our taxes wouldn't go so much. And I'm concerned that the school is gonna come in and ask for another referendum, and I'm not complaining about that. But, you know, we are the same town, whether it's on municipal taxes going up or school, it's the same tax bill. And while you may be saying you're not gonna reduce my taxes, but the school's portion keeps going up. My taxes have gone up, so I commend you on keeping it zero. But this pilot money is money that's not going to the schools, which maybe
So-
could help to.
So I'll just make one point to that. And Ralph has been a good partner to the town. Ralph Zucker, who is the CEO of Somerset and the principal developer. Ralph has said this once, he said it 100 times. Without the pilot, there would be zero. It wouldn't have happened.
No,
So,
it's
right,
not
no,
meant
no,
to
okay,
be-
no, I just want
I
to
hate
make
to
sure.
say that, it wasn't meant to be a criticism
Okay.
of the pilot.
Right.
I'm just concerned that it's like somebody who wins the lottery. I've got all this money, I can spend, and I heard you say, we can spend this much now, but we gotta be conservative. But we don't know what's gonna happen in the years coming through, and I was here in the 7 years, and it was horrible to hear that we had to sell land to pay our operating budget. And I don't wanna see that happen again.
It won't.
Yeah, you know,
Can I just answer about the thing with the optics? If you look at the line item, it doesn't just say silencer, it said, and your son was in the military, it's silencer, optic, sights, lights, so it might not be just one item, it might be like other things for
Yeah,
their.
but I didn't mean to.
You don't know, I know, I
It's just-
know.
I didn't look at the, but I just hate to think that
I
somebody.
see silencer, I'd be like, which?
Yeah, like if somebody's been complaining about guns, then by all means, let's go spend the money. Nobody should be in here. If the police need something, by all means, let's give it to them. And that's my concern. I don't want this town to get into a point where we can't afford to spend money, and then things that need to be done, or departments that really need something, we can't afford to give it to them.
One of the biggest items in our capital, our proposed capital, is roads, right? Because of the years we said we couldn't do anything, you know, the money that we're paying attention to. So we are fortunate to have the pilot in that aspect because it's allowing us to catch up. Because the emails we get on a continual basis are roads, right? My road is broken, my road is, I mean, and people come in here.
I can tell you, my roads.
It's on the list, it's on the list.
And we've been very proactive, and so we're trying to do that because infrastructure is an important part of keeping the town
Yes, absolutely.
as beautiful as it is right now. So we hear you. I don't think anybody's on here would like to spend any money, but there's some things we have to spend money on.
Absolutely, I'm not telling you not to
Yeah.
spend any money, because I can see it in the town what we need to do. It's just not to get ahead of ourselves.
Correct. I
That's
agree.
the thought.
Thank you, Francine. Thank you. Anyone else care to speak to us tonight? Sir?
Mike Thomas, 202 Laurel Lane. Tom, I want to address this one to you. You
Yes.
talking to Joe about the 2.9 million in recreation.
Yes.
He hadn't decided where the money's going to go.
Correct.
The problem is, when are you going to make this decision? Let's just say you pick, say, I think we need a new turf field. That turf field and a practice facility. We are the only football team that practices on a 10 by 10 area.
Right.
It's pretty embarrassing when the coach has to go down to the field for a scrimmage and say, do you mind we practice kickoffs, because we have no field to do kickoffs. But when you make this decision, it's not gonna happen overnight. So what kind of time frame are you looking at?
Very
I
short
mean,
time frames. I think that we hope to introduce the budget next week, hold a public hearing on it, assuming that the budget passes and we have that capital available to us. During that time frame that all that's going on, the five of us are gonna discuss.
So there's a possibility that may get denied that.
There's always a possibility until it passes, I'm sorry. But we've heard everyone speak pretty loudly, and I'll stick my neck out here and say, I think the five of us are all in support of some sort of recreation improvements. I can't tell you it's gonna be, where it's gonna be or what it's gonna be, but I know I've spoken to all my fellow committeemen, and we're all committed to doing something to improve recreation in this
Because
town.
youth sports have a lot to do with the school. You know, youth sports, you know,
Understood.
are good for students, and, you know, if you don't have the facilities here, they're gonna suffer on that part too. All
Right.
right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to ask our lawyer, Mike Collins, just because the pilot's come up a few times tonight, and again, state funding of our school system is such an important part of the overall budget and benefit for the taxpayers. Can you please just talk about the benefits of where a pilot versus not a pilot actually helps our state aid from the education standpoint from the Board of Ed?
Sure, Committeeman. We've previously spoken about this. When you have something that's on a pilot, it's then taken off the tax roll, so your overall tax assessed value of your town in terms of the amount of ratables is lower by the amount of the pilot. So theoretically, by having a lower set of ratables, when it goes to looking at the state aid figures, you're setting what your state aid is for education. Holmdel then has that much less in terms of ratables, and then is theoretically going to receive more in the way of state aid. Unfortunately, as we talked about earlier, state aid's always been minimal for a district such as ours, but if the trends change on that, by not having that much in terms of rateable, that could very well increase what the state would provide in the way of state aid, which is, so that is a causal way of how a pilot could very well serve as a benefit from a state aid standpoint for the school system.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public tonight? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public portion. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out.